Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to this edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez. The Pest Geek Academy is coming along. However, it is taking a lot longer than we thought. We're still recording classes. We're still dealing with quizzes and setting up that infrastructure. So bigger undertaking than I thought, but that is coming. So stay tuned to that. You can always find out what is happening with that class or the lessons that we're putting up at the Academy by going to pestgeekpodcast.com and going to training. There you will find the Academy that is being built. And so we're working on that infrastructure, but this is a little bit more than I anticipated originally to get all this done. So letting you know about that. Also, hey, if you guys appreciate what we're doing here, you appreciate what I'm doing, what Steven Van Tassel is doing, trying to bring you the best free content and be the world's #1 pest control training podcast that is free. If you enjoy it, hey, would you consider donating, supporting us? It's easy. Just go to pestgeekpodcast.com, hit the donate button, and whatever you feel that this podcast is worth to you, go ahead and support us. We would greatly appreciate it. Andrew Tawil, the podcast we did with Ring Boost a couple weeks ago, calls me up this weekend. He says, hey, Frank, we want to do something special for your listeners because we know, hey, you're going through hard times. Guess what, guys? The phone and internet and all the technology that we haven't used is going to be what we're going to be using in the next couple of weeks and probably the next couple of months until this thing blows over. So he called me up and he says, hey, would you be interested in promoting our Ring Boost service and for your clients? And we're doing a 15% discount for everybody that signs up. Offer is going to expire August 31st of 2020. So they're extending this to the end of the year. They're looking out at this as this might be a long time problem. And so if you're interested in getting either a toll-free number for your business or getting a vanity number or getting some type of local, easy-to-remember number, if you didn't listen to the podcast, you won't know what I'm talking about, but go ahead and listen to that podcast and then go on. He gave us a special link. It's going to be ringboost.com/pest. And in order to save the 15%, you need to put in the discount code of PEST15. It's PEST 15. And you're going to save 15% on anything you want on all those services. Just make sure you put in and visit the link that he has given us, because that way we can track it and I can get my commission. Because, yeah, full transparency, I'm getting paid. But if you guys want it, you need it, and you feel this is the right time to save 15% on this, go ahead and log on and get that done. And Andrew, I thank you for reaching out to me and letting us know and letting my audience know what you guys are doing for them. So greatly appreciate it. And here is Steven Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Steven Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife. Today's topic is on skunks because it was requested from a gentleman who emailed me and contacted me and said, hey, he wanted some information on skunks. So I'm responding to the call of the listeners, so thanks for the shout out. There's a lot to say about skunks, but I'm going to break it down over several podcasts. Today I want to talk about transient skunks. So let's reflect back on the difference between transient damage and domicile damage. Transient damage, the animal is not living on the property of the owner that you've been hired to serve. It is an instance where the animal is coming off property, onto the property, doing some activity, and then leaving, such as with skunks. They'll often come from another area, come onto the person's grass, perform an activity we call grubbing. Now, they're doing more than just going after grubs, but certainly it's one of the insects that they will go after in grass. They'll also go after worms, but we call it grubbing, where they're digging small holes in the grass, and then they'll move on. Domicile damage is when the skunk is actually living on the property, such as under the client's deck, under a shed. Maybe they've fallen into a window well, even though it's more accidental or an entrapment situation. But the animal is on the property. You're not having to wonder where is the animal. The animal is living on the property. So today I want to talk about transient damage. This is when the skunk is coming onto the property, but its den is somewhere else. And so some of the things that people complain about is the grubbing instance that I've already spoken about, but also skunks can come onto someone's property, and some dogs just never learn. They will not get the message to leave those skunks alone. So they can be repeatedly sprayed. I don't know enough about dogs, but I suspect that it's because some dogs are so territorial that they will just simply, so aggressive, they will simply go after the skunk and get sprayed repeatedly, suffer the consequences, but that's just how they're wired. And so for some reason, homeowners won't tie them up, keep them away, fence them in, and they go after the skunk, or the skunk comes underneath the fence, and voila, there's an entanglement. The dog has spooked the skunk, and the skunk gives that dog a blast. Sometimes the skunk will die. So I'm not going to talk about rabies today. So if a dog has had an entanglement, you're going to make sure that the owner has gone through all of the rabies information and talked with public health officials, that whole 9 yards. It's a whole topic I don't want to talk about today. I'm just giving you a scenario of situations where we're dealing with transient damage. How do we control or stop the problem with transient damage? All right. Well, the easiest solution, of course, would be to simply harden the person's fenced-in backyard, if it is fenced, to prevent skunks from easily accessing the backyard. Now, obviously, that doesn't do anything about the front yard, but if you can exclude an animal out, do it. I tell people all the time, look, this is not, trapping is awesome and it's important, but sometimes we're trapping animals that don't need to be trapped. Close the barn door. If the horses are getting out of the barn, close the door. And so this would be the same thing with skunks. If you can prevent the skunks from having access to the sensitive area to begin with, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it'd be permanent. So how would you go about doing that? Well, if a person has a fenced yard already, sometimes you can use something called I think it's called Defender. I'm trying to remember the company name here, but it's sort of it's a product that, Defense. There it is, Defense. And so basically it's a steel pronged product that you hammer into the ground. And so you have a device and it will come in like foot lengths or maybe 2 foot lengths, and you just hammer this down into the ground. And so you basically make up for any distance between the fence and the soil below it, and this prevents the skunk from getting underneath it, digging underneath. It's a bit pricey from what I understand, but it's easy to install. Make sure that there are no subterranean pipes that you're worried about. Obviously, if you're in heavily rocky soil, that's going to be really hard to install, or you have a ton of roots. Roots may not be quite the issue. In other words, the tines may bend around some of those roots. But if you're in good, loamy soil, you should do pretty well with this device. It's easy to install, and you're done with it. Now, an alternative way would be to simply use other types of fencing material to increase the distance to decrease the distance between the fence and the ground. You'd make up the gap with some hardware cloth that would depend or add some additional Wire, you kind of have to judge it because aesthetics are obviously going to be a problem. And you're going to want to at least put that down into the ground as far as you can. You'd want to go down probably 12 inches, but probably at least 6. If you can go vertically down, ideally you want an elbow in that at a 90-degree angle where it goes down 2 inches and then out at a 90-degree angle away from the property that you're trying to protect. That way when the skunk hits the fence, he tries to dig underneath it and he's standing on top of the mesh. So think of it as a big L, but you're only 2 inches under the ground. You say, well, why aren't you going deeper? Well, why do you need to? Why make the skunk dig down 6 inches to try to dig underneath? Why not just stop him right there? Plus, it's a lot less digging for you. Use a sod shovel, cut the grass, move the grass aside, put the mesh down, tack it down with some nails, then place the sod back in, have the client water it. Now, the challenge with doing this, of course, is you have to have permission from the owner of the property that you're doing the L on. So, because typically fences are placed near the edge of the property line or just inside. So when you have the L extending out, it will probably be on the neighbor's yard. You could do it an internal L, but you'd want to probably go deeper than the 2 inches, probably go down maybe 6 and then L it out. Or not even bother with that. You get a ditch witch and just simply trench something down about 1 foot. Most animals aren't going to dig that far. It's just not worth it for them. You got to make sure the mesh of the fence is less than 4 inches. I would probably want to bring it down to 3 inches. So you may need to extend the fencing a little bit higher than that, probably 1 foot or so higher than that. Skunks aren't really great climbers. And so the idea is you just don't need to do a lot more than that because skunks are probably just going to move on to another place. So that's an exclusion. Again, that may be a bit much for your client, but it is an option. It's certainly something that you need to consider because some jobs can be solved very easily by just simply hardening the fence and preventing the skunk from having access to the sensitive area. How about pesticides? Can you stop a transient skunk from digging on a property using pesticides by controlling the grubs? Perhaps over the long term you could. The problem is once the skunks have discovered the property, putting grub control down, the skunks are just simply going to finish digging out the yard before the insecticides had an effect. I've found in my experience skunks can continue to dig up a yard for 2 weeks. So if your client's going to be happy with that, I tell them, look, the pesticide is more of a control issue for the next year, not for this year. So that can be helpful. There are various products out there that can be used to control grubs. Now, understand the person can have a grub-free lawn and may still have trouble with grubbing. If there's plenty of worms in there or other insects, there still could be some grubbing going on. Again, grubbing is just a blanket word for the skunk going after invertebrates inside the soil, and they're very precise. They're not like raccoons. Raccoons will shred the soil. Skunks are very precise. Think of it like a squirrel digging an acorn and burying it. Skunks are just like that. They go right to that very spot, use their long nails and dig it up. And they will literally systematically work their way through a yard. And when they're finished, they're going to stop because there's no more food. If no food, no skunks. So that's the other option. Just simply tell the client to wait. Wait a few weeks and it should be over. Now, why do the skunks do this? Because chances are the client is watering their grass or it's gotten cool enough, there's enough rain, and so those insects are moving close to the surface and the skunks are coming through. They're finding those invertebrates and digging them up. So typically it'll occur during the fall months like September, but it can occur, of course, any time of year that the insects are present. Usually there's moisture, but with artificial watering, that throws off the moisture issue. So that is why it is happening. So what if a person says, look, I just want the skunks gone? There's a lot of lawn people out there who just adore their grass and want it to stop. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to probably trap. That's probably going to be the easiest way for you to control. So what do you need to do? Well, you have a couple of options. You have box traps. There are special box traps that are completely enclosed, and they allow the skunk to be caught, and then you don't have to have a blanket or anything. Just walk up to the trap and remove the skunk and dispose of it according to your state law and humane regulations. If you are using a cage, you always want to make sure you are using a blanket. I always recommend no cage trap should ever be set that's not covered at least 50% with either some sort of a cover on it. You want to give the animal shelter from the elements, but you also want, if you catch a skunk, you also want to have a blind spot to approach it. You never want to just throw a cage out on the ground, because skunks have a tendency to walk into cages set for other animals, and that can be a little bit of hassle. So what kind of size traps do you need? I like 7x7x24 size traps. They worked really well for me. I worked in Massachusetts. If you're in a little bit more northerly areas, that still should be enough space, but you can certainly use a larger trap if you wish. But a 7x7x24 should be enough. I like using professional versions of the traps because you have a 1/2 inch by 1 inch mesh. It's not required to do that, but it is helpful because it saves you a step. Because if you are using 1 by 1 inch mesh traps, you want to make sure you're putting some hardware cloth underneath the trap, the footprint of the trap that extends out at least an inch or two on all sides. You say, why are we doing that, Stephen? Well, the reason is a trap skunk, they dig in the cage. And so if you have 1 inch by 1 inch mesh on that trap, he will be excavating soil and grass into that cage. And so you will basically have a rototilled area, a rectangular area, the size of the footprint of the trap, and you'll have 10 to 15 pounds of soil and grass in that trap when you come to it the next day. Now, your client has called you to control a skunk for damaging his grass. So how do you think your client's going to feel when there is a rototilled section on his turf? Now, he'll be happy the skunk has been caught, but he won't be happy seeing this rototilled rectangle 7x7x24 on his property. So that's why you want to use the hardware, quarter inch hardware cloth underneath the trap to prevent that kind of digging if you're using a non-professional version trap or using a 1 by 1 inch mesh trap. So that's a very simple solution for that. Now, a couple of things when you're using box traps. Box traps are going to hold heat more, so that's going to be more humane for a skunk in colder weather. But typically when you have freezing temperatures, that you're not trapping skunks that are grubbing on transient properties. But understand that box traps are going to be warmer, which is great in the wintertime, but terrible in the summer. Cage traps are going to be colder in the wintertime, cooler in the summertime. So you want to be thinking about sunlight, because we're talking, it can be, according to my research, as memory serves, at least 4 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it could go up to 12 degrees difference Fahrenheit, the temperature inside that trap. And that's a lot. That can be a big difference. So you can basically cook your skunk during the summertime. And so you want to, when you're a box trap, you want to be careful about that. So think about shading. Where is that trap going to be located? Are you going to be able to get to the trap early enough in the morning when the animal's caught? And you want to be sure that if you have your client checking the traps, they know exactly what is closed and what is open. With box traps, it could be a bit harsh, especially if they can't see the trap easily, because you're going to have to rely on the door oftentimes to determine whether the trap is open or closed. That means it's going to have to be angled in a manner that they can easily see the door, because customers are lazy. Be warned, and make sure you have a policy that if the client does not call you by like 9 o'clock in the morning, you will make a visit and that client will be charged accordingly. Otherwise, you check the trap yourself every day. if your law requires that, or if it's just your company policy, or have a method of electronic monitoring. More states are adopting electronic monitoring and allowing it. But make sure you find out if it's a legal check for your state, and hopefully you'll pressure states to allow that, because I think it's important technology that we should be adopting, and those prices are coming down. So that's the simplicity of it. You say, Stephen, well, is that it? Well, let me explain a little bit more for you. So whenever you're trapping a transient skunk situation, understand there could be more than one skunk. Could be a female with young and she's training them how to hunt. So there could be a lot. So I don't recommend ever trapping transient skunks with less than 3 traps. Traps are like money. You're going to hear me say this a lot. Traps are like money. More is better. So by all means, use more. So where do you place them? Well, try to evaluate the property and ask the question, where are the skunks likely denning and where are they walking? So skunks like to follow edges. They're edge animals. They like to be in broken forests, which would be plains area, places where there's grassy areas with woods and grassy areas and woods. So they like that. They also like living under sheds. They like living under decks. And so they have a preference for that. So ask yourself the question, as you're looking around the neighborhood, where do you think those skunks may be coming from? And so sometimes you can tell if a lawn is fenced, you can see, well, where is there a 4-inch gap underneath that fence? Is someone going to check? You can ask the homeowner. Sometimes they'll have automatic motion lights in the backyard or something, and those will turn on, and they'll look out and they'll see where the skunks are walking from. Sometimes you'll have dew in the grass, and you will see the dew trail. If you don't have any of that, then try the corners, places think of where a skunk has a little bit of cover. They're bold animals, but if a skunk has the option, he'll want to go along the edge of the bush line or something and come along that line until he goes out into the middle of the grass. So that'd be some places you would want to protect, see where that animal is accessing the property. Then you want to look at where the digging is occurring and ask the client, where is the freshest digging that they've seen? Because the skunk will be very systematic. And you would want to place some traps there at the fresh digging, because they'll just start there the next night. And you would want to place them. So the advantage of using multiple traps is you can try to guard different areas and catch them accordingly. Don't forget to use blind sets. If you have a spot underneath a fence or an area where you can funnel them down, then definitely use a blind set and funnel them into your 2-door trap. Make sure your traps are covered, at least 50%, that you have a blind spot to come into. What are you going to bait it with? Well, this can be tough. There's a lot of debate about what type of bait you're going to use for transient skunks that are grubbing, because some people have found that skunks that are grubbing tend to be focused just on the grubs, and they just sort of ignore everything else. So you're going to have to be a little creative. Certainly, fat will be very attractive. Unfortunately, it's also attractive to cats. But if cats are not an option, then things like fried chicken can be certainly useful for you. If you are worried about cats and you want to be thinking about things like the honeycomb, especially where there's been larvae, where bee larvae occurs. Skunks love that stuff. Honey, molasses, marshmallows can be certainly helpful. And there's also a variety of fruit type baits. Talk to your professional bait supplier. Ask them what they think would be useful, and try to do some experimenting. This is one of the advantages of using multiple traps, is you can try different types of bait. Don't forget eye appeal. And then also, if you're really being stressed on a situation, try to think about funneling. This is where, like when you're armadillo trapping, you can simply create wings on your traps. You can do this with hardware cloth, and basically you're creating a large V, a funnel, that helps direct the skunk into the trap to help them find it. It works great with a 2-door trap. You can funnel them in both ends. But if you just have single door traps, let's say you have one up against a fence, so the fence will be one side, and then you can take another hardware cloth, just sort of stake it in. Could use 6-inch type boards or like planks, and basically try to help funnel that skunk toward your trap to be attracted to that particular spot. And move your traps around and try your baits, and I think you'll find that you will be successful. One caution I want to leave you with, if the client, because sometimes clients are doing stuff before you get there, if they've used an insecticide on the property, on the grass, to try to kill some insects within that soil, and it's been 2 weeks ago, I don't recommend taking that job unless the client realizes that the skunk damage can stop precipitously, and the client's going to look at you like you don't know what you're doing, and the skunks have just stopped coming. The problem with transient skunk damage is that sometimes that it can start and finish as rapidly as each other's. For example, they can start digging out of the blue and then stop digging out of the blue. And if you've had an insecticide application on that grass, my experience has been after 2 weeks, the grubbing activity stops. Now, whether that's because of the insecticide or because the skunks have finished the lawn, I can't speak to that. But it's been my experience that after 2 weeks, you're really on borrowed time. And so if the client still wants to pay you for your time, so be it, but make sure that client truly understands that they're on borrowed time here, and you may not catch anything. And so I think it's very important to have clients informed. Sign some more, explain it to them some more. Make sure this is abundantly clear on the phone before you get there. Otherwise, you're wasting a lot of time and money for people, and that can be quite irritating for them. But that's been my experience, so be careful. So how are you going to charge for this? I'm a big fan of the new practice that's been occurring in the industry where people are charging by time. They're simply saying, look, we're going to trap for 5 days. We're going to trap for a week. Here's the cost plus whatever the visits are going to be. And maybe that includes, so the setup time is going to be covered my placement of the trap and my pickup of the traps. And then any additional visits are charged at whatever. You have to work that out. Otherwise, you can try to do a flat rate and you're trapping for a week. Whatever happens during that week is whatever happens during that week. Make sure you calculate your fees accordingly. Make sure clients do not molest your traps. I can't emphasize that enough. People do crazy things with traps when they set them. Sometimes they're trying to save a fee. So make sure you have that in your contract as well. My policy was if people were bothering my equipment, I was done. I would not tolerate that. If I'm working for a business and the employees are fussing with traps, it's a little bit different. But homeowners, we're done. I don't have time for that. And the liability is there. Remember, when you were charging for your services, there's a liability involved. So you had better be very, very careful with what you're doing there. I hope that was helpful for you so far. Again, that's just dealing with transient damage, skunks coming onto the property, but not living on the property. Hopefully it gives you some strategies on how to do that. Love skunk control. Very, very helpful. I think you'll find that this will be beneficial for you as well. I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Do send me your ideas for additional podcasts for the future. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Great. I'd love to hear from you. Again, back to you, Frank.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.